Welcome to Hoops Royalty. I'm King Jimison, alongside, as always, my man in Cleveland, Karna. And we've got a sleigh full of Royal Hoops takes to deliver under that podcast tree far and wide. I mean, the Grizzlies had some points to unload this week in their Christmas season, as they had two players go for 40 plus. Desmond Bane, of course, dropped a career high 49 against the Pistons last Wednesday, tied for the second most points in Grizzlies franchise history. And of course, the Pistons fouled to deny him a shot at 50. But anyways, and Jaren Jackson Jr. poured in 41 in last night's game versus the Mavericks. Meanwhile, the Grizzlies went 1-2 last week and still sit in 13th place in the Western Conference before Ja Morant's long-awaited return in 3 games. The Grizzlies are kind of doing some like Trout, Ohtani, Angel stuff. Two players putting up these massive numbers in a losing effort, getting absolutely no help except from one Vince Williams Jr. But we'll save that for later. But Karna, before we get into the good and the bad of the last week of Grizzlies action, please tell me, if you had all the money in the world, would you have given $700 million of it to Shohei Ohtani?
There's no other basketball player I would give that much money to other than Shohei Ohtani. The guy's a freak. Happy to see that he got the money that he deserved. Annoyed at the contract as a baseball fan, but we will see what happens.
So I just have to follow up on that. I hear you. Like, he is the best baseball talent of maybe any generation, and certainly this one. But what about the concerns that he might like never pitch again and might not be this two-way star? Obviously, when you look at the details of the contract and they're not really paying him that much year to year, maybe this doesn't even matter. But like, are the Dodgers really going to get what they paid for in this case?
I mean, look, if the bet is in the next 10 years you win 3 World Series with the guy at DH or even in right field, it's still worth it, right? Like, that is worth it. And the way that you think about this is like, in 10 years, what is the value of a $680 million contract, right? Or like however much it is. And the value of that contract seems huge right now. But just based off the time value of money, it is not going to be that as big a contract as you might think. In present value, people are pegging it like $440 million, which is well within the realm of possibility for how much this guy is worth. I think it's a good contract. As a person who loves baseball and teams that aren't the Dodgers, I hate this contract and it's really annoying and I don't like that. But as a person who loves Shohei Ohtani, I'm glad he got his generational wealth.
Yep. And is, I guess, unselfish enough, or at least committed to winning enough, that he is going to allow his team to do a lot around him before then. Unfortunately, the team is the Dodgers, and that makes both of us very upset. But Karna, when you have your $700 million, you're putting it towards an ownership stake in the Memphis Grizzlies.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm buying.
Not paying Shohei Ohtani's contract. Okay, just so we're clear. But speaking of the Memphis Grizzlies, in today's show, we'll give out our royal decrees. Or actually, this week we may only have one royal decree, and more on that in a second. But then we'll discuss Desmond Bane and Jaren Jackson Jr.'s explosions and kind of what it reveals about both players, what we're seeing in the growth from both of these players. And then in the royal court, we'll debate who are the 5 best players on a fully healthy Grizzlies roster this season, excluding Brandon Clark and Steven Adams, although maybe there's an outside shot Brandon Clark joins that conversation. I mean, 3 are clear. We know Ja Morant, Desmond Bane, and Jaren Jackson Jr. are the Grizzlies' 3 best players, will be that moving forward. But the question is, how good can they be? And that's going to be determined by 4 through 9 or 4 through 10, which is hopefully going to start to look a little bit healthier and a little bit better. But Karna, are you ready for me to just get right into my royal decree, which you have deferred your own in order to ask some very hard-hitting questions about mine?
Yeah, you know I like to poke and prod at King, so that's the point of this royal decree.
Karna is in his natural element, but here we go. My royal decree is Desmond Bane and Jaren Jackson Jr. are different players than the Grizzlies coaching staff think they are. And I just had an article published about this on The Lead. Please go and check that out. You can see what I'm talking about in much more detail, especially if you're a visual learner like I am. But the gist of it is the Grizzlies still treat Desmond Bane like he's Klay Thompson in too many cases. He is second in the NBA in dribble handoffs. He is 14th in the NBA in times he runs off a screen for a shot. He's not particularly good at either one of those things. And I think that's because other teams are expecting that's how they're going to use Desmond Bane as more of a pure shooter. But the truth is, Desmond Bane is a 3-level scorer. The comp I used in my article is he's closer to a peak Bradley Beal than he is a peak Klay Thompson. And I think that's actually a good thing for the versatility of his offensive game. What I mean is, obviously, he's an elite shooter. He's 8th in the NBA in threes per game. But he's 16th in the NBA in scoring, not just because of those threes. He's shooting a higher percentage from mid-range than Devin Booker. He is more efficient in the pick and roll than Jason Tatum and Kyrie Irving. His transition opportunities, he's scoring at a higher rate than Giannis and LeBron. Now, he doesn't do any of those three things as much as the players I mentioned. And maybe as we see him get to a higher volume, the same efficiency is not going to stick. But I would bet on the contrary, because he's already seeing insane defensive attention, and yet he's putting up these efficient numbers in the types of plays we never thought he would be able to operate. He needs to be given the keys to the offense in a more substantial fashion now, and even when Ja Morant returns. Because if you have two true on-the-ball creators in your backcourt, that's making you almost impossible to stop. Then there's Jaren Jackson Jr. I think the type of player we tend to associate Jaren Jackson Jr. with is more of like a Kristaps Porzingis type three-point shooter, shot blocker, unicorn, like a Miles Turner, too, is another example. My research shows he's actually closer to like a Joel Embiid or a Giannis in his offensive skill set. Is he at the overall level of those players yet? No, not even close. But he is the most efficient isolation scorer in the NBA if you filter for volume. That has to mean something. He's 4th in the NBA in points scored on post-ups this season. Very efficient in that regard as well. And in the extremely limited pick and roll ball handling chances he's gotten, he is at the 85th percentile. Both Desmond Bane and Jaren Jackson Jr. are creators. They're offensive hubs. They're multiple level scorers, and yet we're treating them like specialists. For the Grizzlies to unlock who they truly can be offensively, even with Ja Morant healthy, you got to give both of them the chance to have the ball in their hands.
So, instead of proposing my own royal decree, I read King's fantastically researched article. You should all go read it. It's just, King is in his bag as per usual.
Thank you.
But I kind of had 3 follow-up questions, and really 4, but let's start with the first 3. I like to think about front office systemically, right? Does the mismanagement of these two players, and mismanagement is a strong word, I understand that, but does that kind of disconnect between what Desmond Bane and Jaren Jackson should be doing according to your research and what they are doing according to what we see on the floor, does that reveal a larger pattern from the front office for misevaluating talent? Another example that comes to mind is Jacob Gilyard. Another example that comes to mind is not using Vince Williams sooner into the season. Is it emblematic of maybe those patterns?
Yes, I'm going to take it in a slightly different direction, but I think that's a great connection. The biggest thing I see is that the Grizzlies have been drafting for specialists. They drafted Jake LaRavia because they thought their biggest need was three-point shooting. Frankly, they drafted Zaire Williams and David Roddy because they thought these guys were not going to be stars. They thought they would be great complementary wings. The problem is when you go looking for specialists, it's a much more high-risk proposition than somebody who's a well-rounded, fully formed basketball player, and particularly somebody who can score the ball in their hands. I think the success that Jalen Noel has had on the Grizzlies, and I got to give credit to Chris Harrington because he's been saying this the whole time, is not as much about Jalen Noel as it is about what the Grizzlies didn't have before him. Make anything happen off the dribble. So the fact that Jalen Noel is like okay at that revealed that was a glaring hole in the Grizzlies roster. And similar things are happening with Desmond Bane and Jaren Jackson Jr. and how they are occasionally pigeonholed. And yes, I know Desmond Bane is getting a lot of pick and roll ball handling opportunities, but it's only like 27th in the NBA. Jaren Jackson Jr. is getting a fair amount of isolation opportunities, but only 30th in the NBA. What they're doing much more frequently are things they're not good at. Desmond Bane, for whatever reason this season, has not been good coming off a screen, probably because he's got like 3 bodies flying at him when he does that. Jaren Jackson Jr. is one of the worst players in the NBA as a pick and roll man, probably because he's not setting the most physical of screens, and also that's just not playing to his strengths. He is not just a play finisher. He is a guy who probably needs the ball in his hands to score. And so, yes, I think the front office is putting players in boxes that don't necessarily fit them. And on the other hand, they're looking for players that fit very specific boxes rather than people who can create with the ball in their hands.
I think that's an excellent point. So, moving on. What do you think happens to Jaren's ISO efficiency or touches overall when Ja comes back? And subpart to that question, you make this interesting comparison between Jaren Jackson Jr. in the article more specifically and Joel Embiid, just like you did in your row of the creed. And I don't want to put you in a box, even though I love painting you in the corner most of the time. But is Jaren Jackson Jr. ceiling Joel Embiid? So kind of 2 parts on Jaren Jackson Jr.
I'm not going to say it's not. It's so hard to see that because he's so far from that right now. But if you just look at the best stretches of Jaren's career, like when Ja was out with his first suspension last season, like these past few games, he's got that level of production. Is he ever going to be the physical rebounder that Joel Embiid is? No, I don't think so. I think that ship has sailed. But he probably already is a better defender, and he's probably already a better three-point shooter, particularly in the ways he can shoot. He's not just like a spot up when he's wide open. He can shoot on the move a little bit. And he's starting to develop that ability to bruise his way to buckets in the paint, whether he's coming from the perimeter off the dribble or getting a post touch. So yeah, I think that is, if Jaren is looking at a North Star for his game, it's Joel Embiid and Giannis. It's not a stretch 4. He's so much more than that. And I think because he's been asked to be a stretch 4, that's what the Grizzlies think are going to complement Ja Morant best. He hasn't fully realized that potential until very recently. Now, about the Ja Morant thing, obviously he's going to get less touches. And is that going to affect both Desmond Bane and Jaren Jackson Jr.? Probably. But in my article, I argue you can get all of these guys the opportunity. It starts with, using their strengths to complement one another. If you put Desmond Bane as the pick and roll ball handler, that doesn't mean Ja is doing nothing. That means he's standing off ball, and if Desmond Bane swings it to him, Ja can attack a scrambling defense, attack a closeout. That's a lot easier for him than having to, bust his head against the wall over and over again on the pick and roll. If Jaren Jackson Jr. gets a post touch, you can have Desmond Bane spotting up for an open 3, and he's still extremely efficient in spot ups. He just doesn't get that many chances because if he's not running the offense, who is right now? So if you let all of them have their turns, I think it's going to also lead to easier opportunities for the guys who aren't on the ball as well. So I think that it will impact Jaren Jackson Jr.'s touches. Probably shouldn't impact it as much as it will, though.
Yeah, interesting. That kind of goes back to our front office coaching staff discussion. And I think the last thing is when Ja comes back, and you kind of really answered this in your last point, right? Which is sharing the ball, sharing kind of the time. But how do we make sure that we are still optimizing for Des strengths? I think there's a concern that, we've seen this special run of basketball for Desmond Bane where he's really come out of his shell, both on the court and really from what we saw in the preseason and early season is off the court as well. So how do we kind of maintain that both on the court, off the court progression for Desmond Bane? Because what you told me earlier is that we are putting players in boxes, and I couldn't agree more. How do we make sure Desmond Bane doesn't go back in the box? Put your coaching / GM hat on first.
Man, I feel like you're the journalist. You were just firing off some fantastic questions, and I love these. I wish I could be Taylor Jenkins and just continue to draw plays for Desmond Bane that aren't running off the screen all the time when Ja Morant comes back. And one of the things I was shocked to discover is that Ja Morant had the highest number of pick and roll ball handling possessions per game in the league last year. You think, okay, it's got to be like somebody like Luka or Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, somebody who's an almost even bigger focal point and doesn't have the level of players around him that Ja does. But no, Ja Morant had the most pick and roll ball handling possessions in the league. That is an underutilization of Jaren and Desmond. It's got to change this year. Ja was fine in the pick and roll last year, and I think that's a testament to his individual brilliance that even though defenses knew it was coming, he still managed to get buckets for himself and others. But they can be so much more if they are using Ja off the ball more, if they're continuing to let Desmond Bane develop his game as a ball handler. There's still a lot of creation to go around because, yes, hopefully you're adding both Marcus Smart and Ja Morant, two creators, by the end of this month. But that still leaves way too short a list on this Grizzlies roster as a whole. So yeah, I want to see Ja Morant off the ball more. I just have this vision of Desmond Bane getting by his man in the pick and roll. Ja Morant comes flying in from the other corner for a lob, like a 6'3" lob threat that we know he is on the fast break, but I want to see that in the half court too. And kind of reverse the roles of those guys, at least at times, to keep the defense off its, or keep the defense on its heels.
Awesome. Great answers. Man, I don't know. If I'm the journalist, you might be the GM. You might be the front office guy based off of those answers. I really like that. So I think with that, those are all the questions I had.
Let's head first to the news of the realm and just discuss a little bit about this last week of Grizzlies basketball and what's kind of been encouraging, what is troubling sign, things to come. So, Karna, the Grizzlies went 1-2 this week. They beat Detroit last Wednesday, 116-102. Detroit has now lost 20 straight games, which is honestly crazy impressive. Shout out to the Pistons. I don't even think they're trying to tank, but if they are, this is elite. And the Spurs are right behind them at like 17 straight losses or something like that. But Desmond Bane dropped in 49. He also had 8 assists, was crazy productive from every spot on the floor. We saw his mid-range game unlocked to a whole new level. Still, it was a competitive game into the fourth quarter, which is probably concerning in and of itself. And then they came home against Minnesota. Anthony Edwards leaves that game in the first few minutes. You think maybe this is a chance, but no. Minnesota pounded the Grizzlies on the boards. I believe it was 63-37. They could not get a stop because even when they would play great defense, couldn't close out the defensive possession with a rebound. And so they lose by 24. And a result that dropped them to 1-9 at home. And then they reached double-digit home losses in the very next game last night against Dallas, losing by 7. Gave up 127 to Minnesota, 120 to Dallas. So that real defensive resurgence we saw after the Marcus Smart rant seems to have been lost. This time we had Taylor Jenkins going on a rant that wasn't nearly as effective. But yeah, I mean, Jaren scored 41. You still lost. Luka was incredible, but he didn't have his running mate in Kyrie Irving, didn't have maybe their third best player in Grant Williams. It was striking to me how much better the Dallas depth was than Memphis's, even though they both had pretty long injury reports. Memphis was missing more guys and more important guys when you factor in Ja Morant, but it's still troubling that Memphis has been consistently more or consistently deeper than Dallas, and that's been a reason why, even though Luka is a certified Grizz killer, anytime he's out, it seems like Memphis has a huge edge in that matchup because they have better depth, whether Ja plays or not. That's flipped, and that is concerning not just for this season, but for the season to come. And Karna, when you look at it, do you think that this Grizzlies team with Ja Morant is good enough to get anywhere close to sniffing the play-in?
The play-in potentially. Is this the question? I think the larger question is this our year to take that next step? And another follow-up question is, are we the Heat? Like, are we the Heat where we can play from the behind against better teams? I think we've proven that we cannot do that right now. it will be interesting to see the way that Ja Morant comes back. I think we are maybe pricing in that Ja Morant is going to come back perfect. I think that is a interesting thought, especially going up against players who have almost a good quarter of the season of the way through under their belt. I think Ja Morant is going to take time. It's not going to look perfect right when Ja Morant comes back. So let's say it gives us another 10 games. I think it's a really, really tough proposition to say that the Grizzlies are going to be competing for the play-in, and even if they get to the play-in, are they going to be competing for the playoffs? I just don't think we're there yet. I think we are missing some key pieces, and I would like to point out in that 3-game span that you just mentioned, I believe Bismack Biyombo plus minus, which again isn't a perfect stat, never gets above -10. Which is concerning to me overall. Sorry, he has a -1 in the
But that's a game you win by 14 and he's in the negatives. Like,
yeah, and
yeah,
we're missing we're just missing good pieces. Like Steven Adams, whatever, we said earlier in the season that Bismack Biyombo was some sort of savior. He is not. He is exactly what we thought he was, and he still serves an important purpose. But we are missing key pieces, and what the Dallas game showed us is key depth pieces. And I think it goes back to something that you said earlier, which is we have drafted specialists, and those specialists right now are not panning out to be NBA level depth pieces. We're talking about Roddy. We're talking about Zaire Williams. He had a terrible stretch against the Dallas Mavericks.
oh my gosh, yeah,
Just
unplayable.
Shots clanking off the backboard. He looked like me at the Lakewood Y. So
no, dude, you're not clanking off the backboard. Now, could Zaire dunk on you at will? Yes, I mean he's still insanely athletic, but no, you give him the business in the post. You could back him down.
Yeah, I think so. All that's to say is we have made a bed where our specialists and our role players are simply not good enough right now. The question isn't just when Ja Morant comes back. It's when Luke Kennard is fully healthy. It's when Marcus Smart is fully healthy. When all the guys, when we're able to put together a fully healthy team, which we'll get to in just a second, are we able to compete in the playoffs? I just don't see that happening this year, where everyone's healthy all at once, where everyone is clicking all at once. And even when we do get that, they're going to have to learn how to play together. It's not going to look perfect right off the bat. So there's going to be that lag time, and we are falling further and further behind in the West, the best conference that we've seen in a long time. I just don't see it happening for the Grizzlies.
Yeah, to that point, Karna, that's a great closing there. The Grizzlies are 6 games back of the play-in right now. Is that something you can't overcome? Absolutely not. No, teams overcome a 6-game deficit all the time. But when you consider that they're currently in 13th, so they still have 2 more teams to climb over, including the Warriors, before they even get in that conversation. And then there's a total log jam there in the play-in. 4 teams actually are tied in terms of the standings, and the Grizzlies are 6 games back of all of them. It sets up that it's possible, but you're going to have to make up so much ground. You're going to have to be so much better than you are. Keith Parrish on Bass Break Breakfast today, or on Grits and Grind, said he thinks the Grizzlies will win about 60% of their games once Ja Morant and the rest of the crew is healthy. And if they do that, they'll probably get at least to like the 11 and maybe even to the bottom of the play-in. But I think what you're saying is if they get into that play-in, this is not the Miami Heat or the Lakers last year who were in the play-in and thought if we can just make it, we have a chance to win 1 playoff series, 2 playoff series, maybe even go all the way to the finals. I cannot see that happening even if Ja, Bane, and Jaren are incredible, because the depth of this team is among the worst in the league. And that was displayed in striking detail these past 2 home losses. And it's such a structural problem that you could not fix without a major trade that the front office is probably unwilling and maybe even unable to make. Because if the Grizzlies played the Timberwolves in the playoff series, let's say the Timberwolves hold where they are, they're the 1 seed, the Grizzlies sneak into the playoffs as the 8. That series is going to look exactly like these past 2 games where the Timberwolves have beaten the Grizzlies by 20 plus. Maybe it's better because you have Ja Morant's offensive output, but nothing's going to be stopping Rudy Gobert on the boards. The only thing that might stop him is if Ja Morant plays him off the court in the pick and roll. But it's just it is something they can't fix because their two best rebounders are out for the season unless Brandon Clark makes a miracle
Shout
recovery.
out the number one Rudy Gobert fan, AJ, former friend of the show.
Dude, he's
AJ.
looking smart though. Like Rudy Gobert, watching that Timberwolves game, is their most important player. And Edwards went out, at least against the Grizzlies. That didn't matter that much. He's obviously incredible.
Yeah,
But
I think he's the most important player that on the floor against the Grizzlies.
yeah, because he's just such a distinct advantage. They don't have anybody who, like Jaren actually, I thought gave good effort against Rudy Gobert and scored some points in that game, but it just didn't, like Rudy just went over him. There's nothing you can do about that.
It's tough. I mean, 20 rebounds is an insane stat.
Yeah.
Especially in this NBA. That's crazy. When the 3-point chance for like a big man to rebound like that, you just got to be fully dominant, especially considering how many shots are taken outside now. It's crazy. But yeah, look, is it out? I think both King and I are in line with each other. Is it out of the realm of possibility that the Grizzlies can go to the play? Absolutely not.
I think I actually predict that they will. I think they're going to get to like the 10 seed. And that would be a success. But I would be pretty astounded if this team won a playoff series because of some of the guys you're going to have to trot out there, even if you shorten your rotation to 8.
And I agree with that. And as you get further into the playoffs and you with a short rotation, I think what we've learned from the last 3-4 seasons in the NBA is that you got to play guys deep as when you get deeper into these playoff runs. There won't be short series for the Grizzlies, so that this is not the year that we win a championship. I think both King and I agree on that. The question now becomes, what are you playing for, and what are you trying to achieve this season that may be out of the realm of a NBA championship, if we're being honest.
Yeah, and I think getting into the playoffs via the play-in would be a huge success that the Grizzlies could look at as an optimistic end to the season, and build so much momentum.
Yeah.
Even reaching the play-in and not making it, because odds are they'd be in the 9-10 game. They'd have to win 2. Even that I think would be considered a success, given that they are currently 6-16, and a lot closer to a number 1 pick than a number 1 seed.
Tough, but fair.
Well, I think that's it. We didn't really mean for that to get into a play-in ceiling discussion. I'm still in on the Grizzlies with Ja Morant. I do think they're going to be an above 500 team in the games he plays. The question is, does he play all the games? And the question is that even enough? Like, they're going to have to be well above 500 to get to the 40-win mark that seems necessary for the play-in. All right, let's head on over to the Royal Court and talk about those guys that are going to fill out the rotation once we have Ja back next week. I guess a week from today. Shout out to the Ja Morant return game. It is only a week away, only 3 more games of Grizzlies basketball where we won't have Ja. So here on the Royal Court, Karna, I want to talk about what does the Grizzlies rotation look like once Ja Morant is back. And we're going to take 3 players for a given. That's obviously Ja, Bane, Jackson. Who is the 4th best player on the Grizzlies, though, when fully healthy? And again, we're going to take out Brandon Clark and Steven Adams from this discussion because we don't expect they're going to see the court at any point. But who do you have as that number 4 guy?
I have it as Marcus Smart, and I understand that Vince Williams Jr. has really made some waves. He got like we were talking about. He got respect from Luka, which is one of the more dynamic offensive players in the NBA. I think he's fully gaining confidence on the court based off of how he's talking to Luka. One thing I love King more than maybe even basketball itself is talking trash.
Absolutely, you do love that.
Yeah, it's just great to see that confidence build. That being said, Marcus Smart is a generational talent at perimeter defense. His instincts for the game are almost second to none. And the leadership that he provides on and off the court, I think, has proven that it fits within the Grizzlies locker room. So I'm putting Marcus Smart as my 4th best player. and maybe he's not even the fourth best player from like how offensive dynamically he is, or things like that. I think he's the fourth most important player to the Grizzlies as well. So that's where I stand. I think fourth place got me Marcus Smart.
I can't wait to see Marcus Smart with Ja Morant in the role that he's best suited for. Like, we know that he was struggling as a pure point guard, and that was the same thing in Boston. Like, when they needed him to be a full point guard, he was not. But if you allow him to be an off-ball player, where he's a decent three-point shooter, not bad, and he can be a secondary creator, and then his focus can really be on the defensive end, that's going to be the perfect role for him. And most of all, we all hope that he's getting in Ja's ear. He continues to get in the rest of the team's ear, raise the level of play. I fully agree. Marcus Smart is the number 4 guy, and the Grizzlies need him to be if they're going to get anywhere close to their ceiling. What about number 5, though? Who is the Grizzlies' 5th best player once Ja's back?
Jake LaRavia. No, I'm just kidding.
Don't with me.
So I'm going to preface it by saying this. The fact that it's hard for me to think about this is frightening. Think about the depth of a Denver Nuggets or a Los Angeles Lakers. There's no doubt who the best 5 players are for those teams.
And if there is doubt, it's because there's like too many good ones.
Exactly.
Particularly on the Lakers.
Exactly. There's a pretty steep drop-off after number 4. I will say, and even though his position is cannibalized, what's proven to be true is that Vince Williams Jr. is the 5th best player. The 5th most important player is going to be Bismack Biyombo. Because you just can't get dominated on the boards like we did against the Timberwolves. It's unfortunate. But there's a distinction between best and important. And I think that the 5th spot is really shows that distinction. Bismack Biyombo provides the physical presence that we need, that we're missing with Steven Adams. And even though he's had a tough stretch of games, 1, he's a veteran, and I think he'll figure it out. And 2, people like Rudy Gobert just can't have 20 rebounds a game. And Bismack Biyombo is the only person that we have on the roster that can do anything about that, even though he did. So that is concerning, but also he is our only possible solution at that. So that's where I'm going with that.
That's crazy that you said Vince Williams. And honestly, if you look at his NBA career, obviously he's not the 5th best player. There's more accomplished players, and the one I'm going to name as number 5 is certainly more accomplished. But Vince Williams' impact is undeniable. And it's kind of weird to me that David Roddy played fine last night, but David Roddy still played more minutes than Vince Williams, even though Vince Williams did a pretty awesome job on Luka. In the possessions where he was the primary defender, Luka did not do well. You can look up Sean Coleman's Twitter to see the exact stats and see some good video of those plays. Shout out to Sean for putting that together. But if they'd had Vince out there for every possession that Luka was terrorizing the Grizzlies defense, might not have been such a scary sight. And in a 7-point loss, that seems like yet another coaching error we can pin to Taylor Jenkins. I think the 5th best player, though, is still Luke Kennard. And the problem here is you can't really play those 5 best players we've talked about together very often. They're going to be too small. And that leads to some real potential for trade talks. Luke Kennard is a coveted asset. Anybody can use an above 40% three-point shooter who also competes on the boards. Obviously not a good defender, but he can rebound, can do a little bit of secondary creation stuff. I think when he gets back, people are going to remember why he's so valuable, particularly alongside Ja Morant, because he provides incredible spacing, and Ja's such a great passer, he's going to find him even when the defense is closely attached. So Luke Kennard is my 5th best player. I know his shot wasn't falling early in the season. Then he found it right before he got injured. Hopefully he comes back and there's not that ramp-up period. He gets right back to that 45% three-point shooting we've come to expect from Luke Kennard.
Yeah, the issue with Luke Kennard is he's not very portable. In a sense, for especially the Grizzlies system. Again, am I saying Vince Williams is like one-on-one the best player on this, or like one of the 5 best players in this team? No, I'm not saying that. I did honestly forget about Luke Kennard. I won't lie to you.
I mean, it's easy to because he's barely played this season.
He's barely played this season. So the way that I view the question is who's been the 5 most instrumental for our winning 6 wins. And I think Vince Williams is definitely one of those 5 players.
Yeah, absolutely.
That being said, I've contradicted my own self, which is saying Marcus Smart, putting Marcus Smart in there. But all that's to say is, look, Vince Williams is a guy who's going to make energy plays and be a stopper to some of these perimeter guys. Him and Marcus Smart on the floor at the same time is a worrying proposition offensively. But defensively, is there a better defensive backcourt in the NBA? Just based off of the small sample size. It's hard to think of a better defensive guard duo than Marcus Smart and Vince Williams Jr., which is an interesting thing. I think Vince Williams Jr.'s defense is one of the more dynamic skill sets overall that we see. Like, if you think about a suite of skills, right? Ja Morant has a suite of skills, his floater, his drive to the basket, his explosive athleticism, all of that goes in his offensive bucket of skills. I think Vince Williams has an incredibly dynamic defensive bucket of skills.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Him a really, really, I think he's moved drastically up the rankings, and I would argue that he's moved up against all of the young wings.
Easily.
I think he's easily probably the one that sticks around, the most important role player that we've seen so far. So that's where I'm going with that. I'm excited to see more from him as the season goes on.
Yeah, and I do want to give some flowers to David Roddy. I mean, I think he's been playing significantly better. It's not that he hasn't earned a starting role over the person who had it before, which is Zaire Williams. It's that, and this is going to go back to my royal decree last week, it's that his skill set, Roddy's, is going to fit better with the bench because he actually does provide some scoring pop that Vince Williams does not. Now, Vince Williams was the 3rd leading scorer in the last game, the only non-Bane Jackson player to reach double figures, but he is a spot-up shooter. He exclusively takes open threes and sometimes attacks the basket or, will get a putback. He's not going to create for himself. David Roddy, meanwhile, I actually think should probably take the ball to the basket more because he seems to be really effective when he does it. If on a bench that is starved for offense, you kind of just unleash big body Roddy while putting Vince Williams in a starting lineup where he can lock up the other team's best player and fill the rebounding hole, that seems to be the best utilization of everybody's skill set. And then going back to Luke Kennard real quick, in the 4 games before he got hurt against the Lakers after just 6 minutes, he had 15 points, 4 threes against the Blazers, 13 points, 3 threes against Miami, 14 points, 4 threes against Utah, 13 points, 4 threes against his old team, the Clippers. Did not shoot below 44% from 3 in any of those games. I think the Grizzlies could use that about now when, as I just said, they only had 3 players in double figures last night. Their 3-point shooting is improving as a team. Their 3-point defense is improving as a team, but they just don't have people who can fill it up. Luke Kennard, because he is a generational shooter, can do that.
I have a question for you. What about Santi Aldama?
Yeah, another guy who, like David Roddy, is putting up some good numbers. I think shown some solid growth and is a guy I want the Grizzlies to keep around. Like, if you get past the Santi Aldama, David Roddy, Vince Williams, Luke Kennard area, there's nobody behind them that I would be sad if they were no longer on the Memphis Grizzlies. And any of those guys I still see as expendable. But I think Santi Aldama has earned his way. He is a certified NBA rotation player. He's just got to get a little bit more physical. Like, at this point, his body type does not allow him to bang in the post like he needs to be able to be a starting level big. And so he's a worthwhile developmental project because I think we've seen that European big men with some passing savvy can turn into incredibly valuable players in this NBA. But in Santi's case, the biggest obstacle is going to be building up that strength and becoming actually more of a big man, not less.
Look, man, he can pick up some of the pounds I'm trying to lose. Because, good lord, do they not know
Dude,
about mass gainer in Memphis? Dude,
you just ran a half marathon. You got to stop. You're
I
in incredible shape.
I feel like though it's so hard not to gain. Like you have to be intentional not to gain weight in Memphis at this point. Like Central Barbecue's there, Rendezvous. Like, come on. Like, no. All that's to say, I agree with you. There's a physical gap between Santi Aldama and the rest of the NBA. It's obvious. Anyone who's watched basketball will know that Santi Aldama needs to get on whatever plan Giannis was on when he first got into the league. It's night and day. It helps prevent against injury to put on that much muscle mass or more muscle mass. It helps you drive to the basket. It helps in a whole number of things. So I hope the Grizzlies front office is able to kind of make that progression. Even Chet and Victor kind of have similar body types and are also actively trying to put on weight. Chet looks a little bit more filled out than he did right when he was coming out of college. So maybe it's a function of time, but I'm hoping to see that progression for Santi, because if he does do that, it opens up his game a little bit more, and the potential then is sky high. He's a tall wing who can move his feet, who can score inside and outside at that point. Would be an exciting proposition if he's able to gain like 20, 30 pounds of muscle over the offseason.
And also if he can shoot better than 62% from the line. I mean, come on, Santi. Like, his 3-point shot hasn't been falling, but like he is billed as a shooter. You got to hit your free throws.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I think if you look at a rotation, there's Ja Morant, Desmond Bane, Jaren Jackson Jr., Marcus Smart, Luke Kennard, Bismack Biyombo, Vince Williams, Santi Aldama, David Roddy. That is a competent NBA 9-man rotation. And it's not something the Grizzlies have been able to put on the floor all season. They have not had a competent 9-man lineup. And also, you're going to allow people to kind of slide back into roles they're more comfortable with. And I'm not talking about Bane and Jackson. I want them to continue and even get more opportunity in these creation roles that they've taken on. But I'm talking about not putting so much on Santi Aldama's plate. I'm talking about let's not try to have Luke Kennard operate on the pick and roll. Let's just let him be a 3-point shooter. And if you do that, everybody's going to start to look better. The hope is that Ja Morant unlocks everything. I'm not sure that he will, because this roster still has glaring holes, but it's not going to hurt. That's for sure.
I'm with you.
Any last thoughts on today's episode, Karna? Probably the last episode we will record before Ja Morant's return.
I'm excited to have 12 back, man. I'm really excited to have 12 back on the court. He exemplifies the best of Memphis at times, and I'm excited to see the best of Memphis on the court.
Well, I gotta stop you there. Ja Morant has been back on the court, or rather back in the court, in the civil trial. And thank you to those who are covering the trial. I've been particularly following Jeff Calkins and Drew Hill of the Daily Memphian. Just seems like a silly show in there, man. I mean, the kind of stuff that they're doing in a crime-ridden city, throwing a basketball back and forth in a courtroom, it seems like a waste of time. And it seems like Ja has a pretty good attitude about it. So hopefully that's signifying he's ready to come back in all aspects of his life. But hopefully that wraps up quickly and can be put in the past, because, yeah, it just seems like such an unnecessary waste of public resources.
In Memphis? Are you crazy?
They have abundant public resources, right?
Yeah. I love that city. We love that city.
We do.
This is not the best use of resources, and we need 12 back on the court. That's it.
Well, that's it for Hoops Royalty as well. And please like and subscribe on YouTube. 5-star reviews and nice comments wherever you get this podcast. That is our only Christmas wish from each one of you, and it really helps us out. So while you're in that giving spirit, go ahead and give out those likes and reviews. We will be back next week to discuss Ja Morant's return. Karna, we haven't talked about this offline, but I feel like we need to wait till after Ja to record the episode next week. So, Wednesday or Thursday. We'll give you the recap of what will hopefully be a triumphant return. And until then, thanks so much for listening. Have a wonderful holiday season, and go Grizz.